Welcome to the Harley Fair Online and this presentation about Robes of Honour. My name is Ben Evans and I am the editor of Harley Magazine. We're lucky enough to have Tim Stanley, who is the senior curator in the Asian department at the V&A and who is responsible for the Middle East section at the museum. Tim is also co-curator of the V&A's recently opened blockbuster exhibition Epic Iran, a survey of 5,000 years of Iranian art. The exhibition has been planned for many years, but its opening suffered various delays due to the coronavirus, but it has finally opened to 5-star reviews in the national press and similar praise in the international art press. Now, during his research for the exhibition, he discovered new information about two silk textiles that appear in the exhibition that were used as robes of honor. And we're lucky enough that he has found time to share with us that new research for presentation on Harley Fair Online. I hope that you enjoy the presentation and that you can join us for some of the other exhibitions and presentations during the next few days. I hand over to Tim Stanley.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Robes of Honour, a lecture I'm going to be giving in the context of the Epic Iran exhibition, which is being held at the Victoria and Albert Museum at the moment. It runs from the 29th of May to the 12th of September. And in the exhibition, we have a number of textiles that I think fit together with regard to the subject of Robes of Honour, which is actually one of the subsections of the 8th section of the exhibition that is called Royal Patronage. I'll try and give some context to why I've included the two robes that we do show in that section, and to try and give a bit of an overview of the whole story. In the end, rather than being entirely with pictures of textiles, I've got a variety of media to show, and I thought that an alternative title for the lecture could actually be Rock, Scissors, Paper, because as you will find out, there's a lot of rock, and to create some of the slides, I've actually been using paper and scissors and also sellotape. We start off in the 7th century AD in Tarka-Bustan, in Kermanshah. It's in the suburbs of Kermanshah. And Tarka-Bustan is a very important late Sasanian monument, and its location in the Zagros Mountains is matched by being an important water source. Here you can see a photo I took in 2004 in the very late autumn. The site is next to this artificial lake. There are a number of earlier monuments, rock reliefs at the site. This one is the investiture of Ardashir II, who reigned in the 4th century. And there are also two artificial caves, which are in the form of royal awans, which are these vaulted structures in which are associated with royalty during the Sasanian period. And the one on the right, the smaller one, has two royal figures in it, who we're told by inscriptions are Shahpur II and Shahpur III. But the largest of these, the larger, I should say, of these artificial caves is the one that's decorated with reliefs of Khosrow Parviz, who was the last significant ruler of the Sasanian dynasty, and he reigned between 591 and 628 AD. The reliefs in this monument are quite amazing in terms of their detail and their variety. And I was very lucky in 2004 because you could actually walk up to the Avon. But since then, I went back in 2019 with other people from the exhibition, and we found that the site had been remodeled so that there's a water course in front of the grottos. And at the same time, in April 2019, there was incredibly heavy rain in Iran, a lot of flooding. So the flooding actually meant that you had to stand even further away. So I was very pleased that I had that opportunity to get very close in 2004. The upper register at the back of the Avon shows the investiture of Khosrow Parviz by the gods. And beneath him, beneath the investiture, is a relief, a deep relief of Khosrow Parviz in armor and mounted probably on his famous horse Shabdid. In this case, we begin to get quite interesting information about the textiles that are being used by the Shah in the scenes in the grotto. So in the relief, Khosrow Parviz is wearing a male shirt, which stretches down to almost to thigh length, and you can see how well depicted the male is on this figure. But beneath the male shirt, there is an area where the clothing that the Shah is wearing underneath his armor shows. And this has a motif of a fabulous bird in roundels. And next to, in between the roundels, are these arrangements of formal floral and vegetal motifs. And of course, this brings us into the world of real textiles, because the beast that's shown on Khosrow Parviz's kaftan in the cave is very similar to a textile that is in the Epic Iran exhibition. Part of it, this part of the textile is in the V&A, and another part is in the Musée de la Mode in Paris. We have no proof where the V&A one comes from, but it seems very likely that, as the one in Paris comes from the church of Saint-Leu-Saint-Gilles, which contains the relics of Saint Helena, the mother of Emperor Constantine in the 4th century. And it seems that what happened was, in the 9th century, a French monk went to Rome and he managed to steal some of the relics of Saint Helena. And these were wrapped in this textile and were brought to France, where they were a great treasure of his monastery at Hauteville in Champagne. And at the time of the Revolution, the relics were moved to Paris and ended up in the church of Saint-Leu-Saint-Gilles. And it seems that at some point the textile was removed. It's called the Sudarium of St. Helena. And it seems to have been cut into pieces, one of which was bought by the V&A in 1863. But the textiles in the Avon of Khosrow Parviz at Darkhabustan don't stop there, because on either side of the cave, and in the walls on either side, you see two scenes in low relief which show the king hunting. On the right-hand side, he's hunting deer, but on the left-hand side, he's at a great boar hunt. And you can see that he used elephants in his boar hunting. And they're, in fact, it's not a single scene. The relief shows you different stages in the hunt. At one point, he's standing in a boat, firing an arrow at the boar. And then he's also shown at another stage of the hunt, standing in the boat. And when we look close at these figures, we see that they too show him wearing a robe made of a textile with the same fabulous beast depicted. And again, it very much matches the beast on the V&A textile. Here, though, it's combined with rosettes. And of course, we don't know what technique was used to make the king's clothes. And the reliefs actually suggest to us that they were embroidered. But it is clear that the pattern was very similar. Now, the thing about this, the textile in the V&A, is that we don't know precisely when it was made. It may have been woven as early as the reign of Khosrow Parviz, who reigned until 1628. But of course, that was followed very rapidly by the invasion of Iran from the west by the armies of Islam, which led to the end of the Sasanian dynasty in 651 AD. But Iran itself was not taken over in a direct way by the new regime. People on the plateau especially were left to conduct their own affairs to a degree. And in this context, the production of Sasanian-style art also continued. So it is possible that the textile is from the late Sasanian period, but it's also perhaps even more likely that it was produced in the following centuries when you have a transitional form of art that retains a lot of Sasanian techniques and motifs. There's also some debate about the character of the bird that's displayed on the textile, because the V&A has always catalogued it as a semnorve, and John Curtis in the catalogue for the Epic Iran exhibition is perfectly happy that this represents a semnorve. But there are other people who think that the actual evidence for this being a semnorve doesn't exist, and they think of it as a composite beast who was auspicious and who appears only on the robes of the king, because we don't actually have any evidence of anyone else ever wearing this motif. But the interesting thing is there's another line of thinking which makes the tradition of, which is the subject of this lecture, which is robes of honor, we're pretty sure that the tradition of awarding robes of honor goes back to the Sasanian period. Now, this is a custom whereby a monarch removed their outer clothing and also maybe their sword and whatever headgear they were wearing, and he would present it to another man who he wished to honor. And this is a ceremony which never caught on in Europe, as far as I know, but it's a very important one in the Middle East and over a very long period. So even if the textile with the semnorve was made for wearing by the king, it seems to me likely that on occasion the king would also give his coat, his outer kaftan, to people he wanted to honor. And of course, there's there's an important role played by the pattern and the quality of manufacture of the robe, which is the pattern. If the pattern is associated with the king, as this pattern seems to be, when the robe was placed on the shoulders of its new owner, it marked that the new owner, was personally associated with the king in a way that could be very positive, in the sense it gave, being the friend of the king was to share in the power of the king, but also it showed that you were subservient to the king. It was a mark of vassalage. And this is really part of the story of robes of honor. They were an honor, but they were also problematic sometimes because of the message that they gave. So one issue about the semnorve is that it's a bird that seems to have a tradition going back to the very earliest records of Zoroastrianism. The name changed in the Islamic period, but it survived, the knowledge of the semnorve survived in the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings of Ferdowsi, which was completed in AD 1010, and which is the Iranian national epic, which maintained a knowledge of ancient Iranian traditions in the Islamic period, both in Iran and in surrounding countries. In the texts in Middle Persian, the form of the word Senmurv occurs into the Islamic period, but in the text written in Arabic, which were in the language we call modern or New Persian, the name was changed to Simur. So, of course, we're much more used to seeing the Simur as a Chinese-style phoenix, which is how it was represented from the 14th century onwards. But before that, there doesn't seem to have been any consistent iconography for the Senmur stroke Seymour. And so it may be that the composite beast that appears at Tarka Bustan is in fact just one of the manifestations that of the Seymour that occurred during over this very long period that it was known, or it could be that it's some sort of composite beast whose origins we're not clear on, because there are lots of other birds that appear on Sasanian and post-Sasanian textiles. And in the exhibition, there's also this wonderful one from Jouarre Abbey in France, which was used in a similar way to the green textile in the V&A. And I'm sure people will very much enjoy seeing that. But this idea of robes of honor was, well, we don't know about it in the Umayyad period. In fact, to me, it seems an unlikely adoption of an Iranian idea at that point. But we do have evidence that the robes of honor, the custom of awarding robes of honor, was taken up by the Abbasid caliphs after they came to power in AD 750. And of course, this period, the late 8th century and onwards, is a period when many Iranians served the caliph, and the caliphate adopted many of the customs of kingship that had been current in the pre-Islamic period. And one of those seems to have been the robe of honor. But it was given an Arab name, which is how we know it today. And this is khal'a. And the khal'a is the act of taking off your clothes. That's part of the ceremony that is actually recorded in the name. And so it makes very clear that an important part of the origins of the custom is that the ruler took off the very clothing that they were wearing and gave it to somebody else. But of course, the Abbasid Caliphate was extremely wealthy and had enormous numbers of governors and others who needed to be awarded with robes of honor. So the poor caliph couldn't keep on getting dressed and undressed to satisfy the demand for robes of honor. So there must at some point have been a transition to a point when khal'as became a special sort of robe that was prepared for the caliph to give to those who wished to mark with in this way. So this then becomes, throughout the Islamic period, right up in Iran, right up until the fall of the Khadr dynasty in 1925, it becomes a formula of court behavior, was that rulers would have a very large number of robes of honor created so that they could give these as part of the rituals that associated with receptions at court. And so this is one of the motors for the production of enormous quantities of luxury textiles in Iran during the Islamic period. And the thing about it, though, is why robes of honor do not feature as a major subject within the sphere of Islamic textiles is, of course, that these very expensive textiles were taken away by somebody who was considerably poorer than the ruler, even if they were relatively rich within their own society. And the textile could be received by the members of the household with great joy and be used for various purposes at home. And the V&A does actually have lots of small pieces of textile which have been made up into other forms of objects, such as the covers for trays, which are clearly made from very, very expensive textiles, which could easily have come from robes of honor that had been given out by Shahs of the Safavid dynasty or the Qajar dynasty or any of the rulers of Iran from the 10th century onwards. The other thing that happened, and I don't actually have any evidence for this in Iran, but you do hear about it in terms of what happened in the Ottoman Empire, was that people would leave the palace in their robe of honor and they'd then sell it on the market. So that you'd have a sort of a recycling of robes of honor. You'd given one, you went to a shop, they gave you the value of the robe, and then they sold the robe, presumably, back to the palace. But that seems a very practical way of going on if you're insisting on having this robe of honor tradition. This means that robes of honor survive in really, really small numbers, considering the vast numbers that must have been passing around the capitals of every Islamic state there's ever been. And equal to that is that it was such an ordinary part of everyday life that no one really ever talks about it. And, well, not no one, people do talk about it, but rarely talk about it. And we're very lucky that in the copy of the Jami al-Tawarikh of Rashid ad-Din that's in Edinburgh, there is a scene where Mahmud of Ghazna, who came to power in eastern Iran in 998, he's negotiated his position so that he's recognized by the caliph of the governor of Khorasan in the east of Iran. And the caliph sends him a diploma appointing him as Amir, and he also sends him a robe of honor. And so we have, although we don't have a contemporary image of it, but we do have an image that's created just over 300 years later, which shows Mahmud of Ghazna receiving the robe of honor. And in order to indicate his position relative to the caliph, he puts the robe of honor on. And you'll notice that he's actually putting his arm down the sleeve, which, as we'll see, is not what people did later on. I think you'll see that the sleeves are overlong. Maybe, I'm not sure about this, but it may be that's part of a custom that you see elsewhere. Someone who wasn't going to do any work sometimes wears a cloak with sleeves that are so long they can't use their hands, but that's just speculation on my part. So among the robes of honor that do survive, these mostly survive in a culture that did not create them. Here there's a very nice slide from the Epic Iran book that shows two views of the robe of honor that was made in Iran, and maybe in the late 16th century, but certainly it had been made by the early 17th century. And it seems that this ended up at the court of Alexei Mikhailovich, who's the second Romanov Tsar, which isn't surprising because the economic relations and trade and diplomatic relations between the early Romanovs and the Safavids was quite regular. So Alexei Mikhailovich then sends it on to Queen Christina. And of course, in Sweden, this is a rarity. And so it's been kept in the royal armouries since it arrived in 1644. And it's really quite a remarkable survival. There are others, such as the one that's in the Kremlin armouries, but I haven't got such a good picture of that. And we know that it's a robe of honour because there's a large oil painting in the British Library, which was created by Richard Greenbury in 1626. And it shows Nab Dalibeg, who was sent to London by Shah Abbas the Great at this time in order to negotiate both trade and diplomatic issues. Contemporary Britons, I should say contemporary English people, because, of course, there was no United Kingdom at that point, were clearly very interested in the Persians. I mean, you see references in Pepys and John Evelyn about Iranians, and there's even the story that Charles II adopted the vest during his reign, and this was the predecessor of the waistcoat. So by adopting the vest and having a coat over it, he was actually pioneering the three-piece suit. But what John Evelyn says is that the vest, which was this undercoat, was modelled on a Persian piece of clothing. Although it is a bit difficult to actually work out what he meant by that, because the earliest waistcoats that survive from that period don't have any link to what we think that Iranians were wearing at the time. So anyway, this was an important thing in London at the time, this ability to attract diplomatic representations of Iran to the court of King James, of St. James, sorry. And of course, this particular venture, the one of Naft Ali Beg, didn't go very well at all because of rivalries within the English court. And poor Naft Ali Beg actually was so fearful of what would happen when he got home that he actually committed suicide in 1627. But anyway, what this painting shows us is that the coat in Sweden could very, very likely have been a robe of honour, because it does look very much like the one that Naft Ali Beg is wearing. Now, another place that some Iranian robes of honour survive is in Istanbul, in the Topkapi Palace. I've had a good chance to look at this particular one during an exhibition on Iran in the palace, and it was also included in the Gifts of the Sultan exhibition by Linda Komaroff that was at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and also in Qatar. This is one of two. There's also a red velvet one. And they arrived in Istanbul about 1580, we think. And we believe that they were a present from Mohammed Khordobandi, who was a Safavid Shah, to Sultan Murad III. And the reason that they've survived is probably because this very idea that that the robe of honour, if you put it on, you were signalling your subservience to the person who'd given it to you. So it was a bit of a cheek for Mohammed Khordobandi to have sent it to Murad III. And it's not surprising that Murad III decided not to put it on, and they were wrapped up and put away, which is lucky for us, because we can see what sort of, the layout of it is actually quite as important to me as I'm going to show you. Now, as I said, the robes of honour weren't confined to Iran. So in the Gifts of the Sultan exhibition, there was also this sakos, which is the vestment that a bishop of the Orthodox Church wore during the Mass. And this example, which is in the Benaki Museum, is made from an Ottoman robe of honour that is made of cloth of silver. Or is it cloth of gold, I realise. You understand why I said cloth of silver when we get to the next one. So I'd already got logged in my head the two robes of honour that were in the Gifts of the Sultan exhibition. And so recently, the last couple of years, I went down to the Jamil Gallery at the V&A, and I had a good look at this sakos, which is, we came into the museum in 1907, and the Anglican priest who sold it to us said that he'd been given it in what's now Jordan. And again, it's a sakos, it's the vestment worn by an Orthodox bishop in the Mass. I decided to include it in the silk book that the V&A is about to publish, which is edited by Leslie Miller and Ana Cabrera, and which I think is going to be a really great treasure. So I thought that this was a very important textile that we ought to pay more attention to. I have to admit that we found this in the store. Rosemary Krill and I were going through the textiles that we could put in the gallery, and we found this, and we said, it's amazing. Let's put it in there. And so we knew what it was, so we could write a label, and we put it there. And I have to admit that I'd never looked at it properly before. And I'm afraid that's what happens in museums. There's not enough time to look at everything. But I'd arrived at this point many years later, more than a decade later, and I actually went to have a look at it. And as I was looking at it, I was overcome by the fact that I couldn't see any repeat in the pattern. And there seemed to be borders which were arranged in a very odd way that were woven in. So I was thinking, not only is it made of cloth of silver and silk, but it's an incredible piece of weaving. And even though I'm not a textile historian, I thought it was worth thinking about. So I went upstairs and I printed out, we have good photographs of both the front and the back. And by the way, this is the slide I meant to show you when I was talking about how wonderful the pattern was. But you can see, although obviously it's symmetrical, so you've got two pieces of cloth which are woven with the same pattern, the pattern actually doesn't repeat itself. And so I went upstairs, and I have to remember that I had in my head that this is the layout of a type of robe of honor. I mean, obviously it's not the same as the one we saw that's in Stockholm, which is a different grade of robe of honor, because there was probably hierarchies. But here was one that has wide borders that run around the neck, down the front, around the hem, and up and down round the vents at the side. And there's also a motif which is embroidered onto the shoulders. So here's my rather childish drawing of what I had in my head when I looked at the 1907 acquisition Sakos in the V&A. So here we are. I decided to print out both photographs, back and front, and I began to cut them up. I took away, there's the yoke around, you can see the yoke around the yoke of the vestment is made from another silk. So if you take that out and you take the little trimmings that have been added, which are clearly not part of the original robe, what you get is this. And you can see that it's, I mean, you can't see the pattern very well, but you probably see that it all is very much the same. And then I divided it up along the seams, and I found that by taking the two parts in the two large parts in the left-hand slide and moving them, reversing them, so that they're on either side of the back of the robe, what you got was a piece of a robe that had the same layout of borders as the Mohammed Khudroband's robe of about 1580. And so this textile is clearly, 17th century. So 1580 is not too far from it. So you can imagine that the same layout was used, but in different materials over that period. And the parts that you see in the upper register of this slide are clearly the full sleeves of the robe, which have been split and opened up and then used to make the sleeves of the sakos. The bits on the left are the ones that, they're sort of patchwork, and they're so small that I'm never going to be able to know at this stage where they come from. So this was my original mock-up, which showed me that what I actually had was a very fine robe of honor from 17th century Iran, which had been remade into a sakos. So here's the full story. So that's how I came to find that the V&A had one more robe of honor than I had thought. And here's another. This is also in the V&A. This is a robe that was acquired by the museum directly from Nasser-ad-Din Shah himself. So if this was a robe of honor, you could say that the V&A was given a robe of honor by the Shah. because he wasn't honouring the museum. He was trying to represent Iranian handicrafts in an international context in order to promote them. But when people see this, without knowing that bit of history that it was given by Nasruddin Shah, they say to me, oh, yes, of course, this is a silk robe for a Bedouin chief. And that's what it was clearly made as. But it seems from the context that Nasruddin Shah was the person who had these robes made, these abars they're called, and perhaps he had them made in order to send them as robes of honor to the leaders of the Arab population, the organized as tribes, who inhabit southwest Iran in Khuzestan province. This would make sense. And it may also, of course, that there were Arab tribes in Iraq who were protecting the holy places of the Shiites. So there's another opportunity for the Shah to give these robes as an award. And first of all, I have to show you this way round from this awful shot from the exhibition itself, because there isn't any official photograph of the front of the costume. But you can see that it actually is quite a striking looking textile. And while we were working on this at the very early stages, I happened to see an illustration in Abbas Amonat's, one of his publications. It was a very bad black and white reproduction of a Qajar prince wearing one of these robes. And my colleague Sarah Piram actually found this, which is in the Malik Library in Tehran, and which shows Ali Qoli Mirza, who was a member of the Qajar dynasty and an important figure under Nasruddin Shah. He's painted, he may well have been photographed to make the painting, in one of these robes as in a tone of paler blue. And so he's wearing it over his shoulder in the same way that Naftali Beg did. And we can take it that this is a robe of honor. So on this basis, we've been able to show two rather striking robes of honor that represent that type of textile in two different ways. We have one from the 1870s that is practically mint in the sense that it wasn't actually given and has never been used, and it's in the V&A ever since. But the other one shows the usual fate of robes of honor, that they were such fantastically rich and beautiful textiles that they were almost always worn out, or in a few cases they've been recycled as church vestments, which has meant that they've been preserved in another form. Well, thanks very much for your attention.